The critically acclaimed film The Shape of Water scooped the nomination for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Production Design and Best Original Score at the 90th Oscars Awards ceremony early this year. Sally Hawkins stars as the mute, plain Sally Elisa Esposito, who falls for what is described as a humanoid amphibian. The plot is part love story, part tense thriller. Francine, does this film work for you?
Oh, I love this film. I mean, it worked for me on so many different levels. Cinematographically, I love the film. I love the artistic direction. I love the lighting. There's everything I just adore about this film. I love the setting in the Cold War American era of the 1960s, the idea of fear of other. It touches on so many different subjects. This beautiful love scene with the water everywhere as well. I just thought it was fabulous. And it's all about, it comes down to how we communicate with the other, and how we respond to the other, and instead of demonizing the other quite literally with this amphibious Amazonian man, how we can communicate and create panels and beauty and art. Oh, I thought it was fabulous.
For you then, it fully justifies the $200 million it made at the box office around the world, plus all of the honours and awards it has taken in the last X number of months. It's that, we'll be talking about this film in years to come. You're certain of that?
Well, I will for sure. Audiences can be fickle creatures, but I hope that they'll see the beauty in this film for years to come as well. No, I thought it was a really moving film. I thought it was very powerful. And not just because of the subjects it deals with, but the way it was filmed, and I thought it was great.
Right. Miro, a fabulous film, powerful. It made 200 million at the box office. What do you think?
Well, from a point of view of disability, I was incredibly underwhelmed. I came out of it and I thought its portrayal of disability was pitiful, almost to the point of being ridiculous. And I think there's a few times even in the cinema I was trying to stop myself from laughing because I thought it was so bad in its portrayal. Because what you have is this disabled character who is portrayed in a one-dimensional way. I'd be interested to think what Paul said, because obviously it's his background of disability stereotypes, but I thought it was a mishmash of various different disability stereotypes in terms of its portrayal. You had this storyline of this person longing for inclusion but is unable to get it, pays attention to the first person who comes along, who is the fish monster. But what I think is quite interesting as well was towards the end of the film, I suppose that there is an argument, and I think it's a very weak argument, but there is an argument that it does try to, although very pitifully, it tries to demonstrate how her barriers, her isolation is socially constructed, although it doesn't go too much into that detail. But then what's quite interesting is right at the end of the film, it reinforces that message of it's better for you just to leave. You're marginalized, you're isolated, you're different, you're othered. And the response should be just leave, because at the end she wants to stay, and then actually it's only because her creepy boss shoots her and she falls in the water that the monster then decides, I'll take you with me into a different world. So it reinforces that message of just, if you are othered, your chances are it's better just to be with your kind somewhere else. And I think that's what really frustrated me with the film. And I mean, there's a number of other points, but obviously we'll come on to them as we go through our discussion.
Paul, Miro is underwhelmed by The Shape of Water.
Well,
Miro is underwhelmed by The Shape of Water. What are your feelings?
It's a difficult one, because it's a bit like when we were just talking about Black Panther, and you were surprised I gave it such a high rating. I try not to want films to be a different film. So, because often when you review something, you sort of say, well, it's rubbish because it's not this. And it's kind of like you have to take it for what's in front of you. And I think Miro is absolutely right on the disability. It was pretty awful and pretty dreadful. On one level, I think the set design was brilliant, and I think it captured the 50s. And I think it's full of cliches, but it managed to bring them all together. But there's no denying the cliches, stereotypes, archetypes. I think, the Octavia Spencer role was absolute cliched. Sally Hawkins cliched.
This is the black best friend.
the best friend, everything about it. Even right down to the gay guy, the aggressive barman, and then Michael Shannon, who was brilliant. Absolutely, it's cliche, archetype on every level. I think what's interesting is he's trying to read it in a completely different way than I saw it. And that's why I think it can be quite interesting, in the sense that I saw the ending as that she, the Sally Hawkins character, isn't a human being. She is a creature from the sea who is rescued by her own kind. And what Michael Shannon represents is the true nature of contemporary society. As Mira identifies, you cannot have any degree of equality as the other, and you can only achieve it by escaping absolutely from the impressive nature of male hegemonic normality. And so if you see it like that, it's actually a lot better than you think it is. But if you don't choose to see, and I do in a way, that the main woman is, and that the scars on her neck, she's been cured of being. They've operated on her to make her normal, and normal is an absolutely destructive force. Now, I've been to university for many years to look and study films, and I think I can see it that way. I don't think virtually anybody in the audience would ever see it anything other than that it's this nice white middle class girl, been a bit oppressed, can't speak. She falls in love with a monster because she feels a bit of a monster herself. If you see it in that way, it's pretty shit, really. It's pretty naive, simplistic, cliche fairy tale rubbish in a way. But except for the set design, and I did admire the set design because I think he captured that brilliantly. The darkness, the colours, the reds, the greens. I have a big problem with the boiled egg scene, which annoyed me immensely, in that it never did anything with it. I felt it had been re-edited after a test screening and I'd lost some of it. But I thought what was most interesting for me was to think about how to interpret it in a different way than actually most people would see it. And I think the director wanted it that way. And I do get the feeling that actually he made a better film and actually was forced to edit it, that take away some of the truly challenging things in it. Having said that, Pan's Labyrinth is one of the worst films I've ever seen. So I'm not going to let him off too lightly as a director, because that could have been a great Spanish Civil War film ruined by kind of magic realism and surrealism, awful stuff. So it's a difficult thing because I like to go and see if I see it this way, if I see it that way. And again, doing podcasts on cinema, as I did with Theo Newman and my other ones in the past, I remember we used to watch films and we saw completely different films. I mean, it's the same film and it's kind of like, what on earth were you watching? Why didn't you see it? And why did I see it like that? Why did you see it like that? And he used to go, goodness me, what, where were you? Where were you when you're watching this film? And that's what is the joy of film. So often I try, because often you can watch a lot of films and you can end up being so negative, as I tend to be about Black Panther, etc. But it's nice to think about, if you see it in a slightly different interpretation, bring all this to it, instead of it just being clever, because I think it did suffer from being a bit clever. There's far too many kind of in-jokes, movie references that I think, only film historians would have got. The Creature from the Black Lagoon, there's lines in it about where he was rescued, which is where the Creature from the Black Lagoon was filmed, all that kind of stuff. Nice and clever. But the disability stuff was awful. I think even on a kind of gender level, it was pretty awful. The women were pretty weak compared to in dealing with their oppression, and it was to run away. Even the sassy black woman taking on her husband near the end, pretty cliche stuff. Yeah. So I suppose that's what I'd say about it. It may have been a bit incoherent, but actually I chose to see it in a particular way that gave it a lot more of a redemptive feeling towards it, but actually that is rooted in a deep cynicism that there is no hope of equality, justice or inclusion, and that absolutely the only way to do it is escape with your own kind, which I think is probably pretty much fairly good social analysis. So.
I can take something from all of your answers. I agree that the plot was pretty thin. The two-dimensional characters were just terrible. Treatment of disability, again, mute woman who must pleasure herself because she can't find a man. I thought that was awful. The treatment of the black characters, I mean, absolutely disgraceful in 2018. Given what we've already discussed about Panther today. But there is always the but. In terms of a love story that was designed to deliver a slightly different take on the usual rom-com to a mass audience, it's done its job. You know, Francine is right when she says that it's a fabulous film, because it's done its job. It's made a lot of money. When a film like that, if you said, look, we're going to have a female character who is mute, she's going to meet a humanoid amphibian, and they're going to fall in love and they're going to end up in the sea, that's a terrible pitch. So the fact
sounds like a Disney movie to me.
yeah, as a cartoon it might have worked, but not as a Hollywood blockbuster. So I think Francine's right. But Francine, since we've talked about this in the past, the Bechdel test, how does this film rate as regards that? And just in case people don't know what that is, just set that up for us first, please.
Bechdel test, I mean, it can't be taken too seriously because it was set up initially in a cartoon, basically. And the cartoon characters, two women, so are there two female characters in the film with names who speak to each other about something other than a man. And I was thinking about this test for this particular film. Well, there are two female characters in the film who have relatively lead roles in a way. They speak to each other by communicating, and they do communicate at times about something other than the human amphibious creature. So I guess in that sense, it would pass the test. But you have to say the test is something to be taken a little bit with a pinch of salt, because it's an awareness-raising tool. So it's just to bring out, in a very crude way, does this film still have, essentially, is this still another film where we have two old male characters saved the day? This is why the Bechdel test is interesting in terms of countering that. So for me, it passes the Bechdel test, but then we can't take the Bechdel test too seriously. For me, what was more interesting in the film was this idea of communication. I like this idea of communication. I like the love scene as well, with all the water surrounding her. And you know what? I don't mind some cliches, because, good grief, in the world in which we live, some silly cliches coming up can sometimes, you know what I mean, can serve a message to reaching a mass public as well, in a way that they, you know what I mean, that they can hear. So the old cliche I can handle.
The film is not a sociology lecture, that's for sure. Miro, this film does take the medical approach to disability, as you've mentioned, as Paul has mentioned. We see how the sexual desirability of Elisa is portrayed. Should we forgive all of this because the film is set in the 1950s? It's a bit like Mad Men. Those things were done then. It's not 2018. Shouldn't we just see it for what it is?
But I think that that's a really interesting point I was going to make before. Is that
we'll be the judge of that, Miro?
But what I thought was quite interesting was the film was set in the 1950s, and I agree with the comment about, aesthetically it was spectacular, and there was a lot of references to films. But also, as somebody who is interested in the representation of characters in video gaming, there was a lot of references to video games as well, because the director is heavily involved in the gaming industry. But what I thought was quite interesting was having it set in the 1950s with the overt examples of racism and sexism and ableism, in regard to disability, and of course her friend in terms of homophobia. There's a danger. When I left the cinema, I thought there's a danger here that people will watch this and will think, well, we'll pat ourselves on the back because actually this was 1950s. And of course, that doesn't happen anymore. There's traits of ableism, of homophobia, of sexism and racism. So you've got this feeling that actually are people trying to compartmentalize it and box it, rather than think about how these running themes throughout the narrative are still reflected in contemporary society, overtly and covertly. And it's a question about how do we ensure that, again, I suppose to come back to what the point of going to see a film is, but for me, I wanted to think about how do we take the examples of of the scenes in the film of these different notions of oppression and marginalization, and ensure that we still question our behavior in contemporary society and how some of these issues are still there. In terms of the medical model and disability, I think there was numerous stereotypes reinforcing that. It was in the first few minutes we saw this I think it was a masturbation scene of her on their own. And again, and for me, I was sitting there and I read a blog afterwards, and there's a great line of almost like this creepy sexualization of innocence, and it was that for me. That's why I was watching and thinking, what is this supposed to be explaining to the audience, particularly those who don't have any experience with ableism, who are ableist inadvertently in their behaviours. What's this actually portraying in terms of to people? And I suppose I just, the reason why I felt underwhelmed was because I left the cinema. I thought, well, actually, what this film is demonstrating is that if you are different and you go against the convention of beauty, then that's reinforcing the symbolism of a monster. And for that reason, I was just like, well, it was not a surprise, but again, it's not something that I really necessarily want to embrace after I've watched the film. What I think was quite interesting as well is the use of subtitling in the film. So when I was watching it, and I thought, how fascinating that you've got a main character who is using sign language to communicate, and you've got the subtitling for when she communicates in her sign language, and you've also got the subtitling for the Russian characters in the film. So what you've got is but you haven't got any subtitles for anything else. So you've got this reinforcement of an assumption that the audience are going to be able to hear. They're going to be able to speak English, but they won't be able to speak sign language or Russian. And I thought that was quite interesting. How something that a small tweak to the film would be to have the whole film in subtitles to demonstrate the importance of communication, as Francine has highlighted. But yet there is this assumption made by the production team and by the editors that the audience are people who don't have hearing impairments and who don't actually have any connection to sign language or to other languages other than English.
Well, I just want to say I think it's very important to notice that the main Russian bad guy is in fact Nigel Bennett, who is from Wolverhampton, which is where I'm from, which is where I live. So good to Nigel Bennett. He lives in Canada at the moment. But equally, I think that was an excellent point by Mira about communication and the language. I'm intrigued, just to ask all three of you, did you see it that she was one of the creatures who was rescued? Or did you see her as a human woman who was then rescued? How did you see that?
I'll go last. Francine?
I saw it more as for me, it was a love story between, it was an exploration of alterity, of difference for me. So it was a love story between two people who are different from, and for me it had a link to the Russian story as well. So I was seeing it more, I was interpreting it a little bit differently. And as you say, everyone interprets films in their own way. So for me, it was a love story in that the focus on alterity and difference, it was the main focus. So, yeah.
And Miro, because like you mentioned the masturbation, it was always underwater. It was in the bath. And again, that's because that to me, what that was saying was that she was one of them.
Yeah, and I think, but this goes back to your point before, Paul, about the editing of the film. I'm sure I read somewhere how it actually was supposed to be half an hour to 45 minutes longer, but they had to cut it for the intent because of of what they deemed acceptable by Hollywood. But I spoke to I remember like going for lunch to your house afterwards and asking you about the film, and you said, didn't you get the scene about how he cuts her neck in order for her to breathe underwater? And of course I saw that, but I look at it and I think, going back and thinking about what you were saying, that I saw that, but because I was just watching it in the moment, I just assumed that was a case of he was cutting it to allow her to enter this alternative place after the hostility and the oppression created by Shannon's character, who I agree that is a phenomenal actor, although he's been typecast because everything since Boardwalk Empire is the same character. But yeah, I got that impression that she was being sliced in order to exist in this new world, rather than she was somebody else who's been fixed and placed inside this ableist society. But thinking back on what you've been saying, then there's a convincing argument for that.
I would agree. I think that's a brilliant analysis of the film, Paul. I didn't see it in that way at the time. I thought it was this totally othered character who, she didn't just pleasure herself once, she pleasured herself twice. And I thought that was deliberate as a marker to the audience that this woman is unlike any other. And there's also a scene with the main character, the main sort of protagonist, the male guy, who has his blonde, beautiful homemaker at home, but he's thinking about this exotic character who he'd rather be with. So I had the impression that this humanoid amphibian was rescuing this woman from this terror of living in the world where the ableist perspective always dominates.
I just want to ask Paul a question around, because I know you've talked before about the portrayal of using non-disabled actors in disabled character roles. What did you make of Sally playing somebody who is disabled, but of course she doesn't have a hearing impairment, nor does she use sign language to communicate? Well,
and of course, if you're going to bang in a scene where she's utterly normal and sings and dances, you can't really have a disabled actor. And I think that's one of that's why I think script writing and that kind of fundamental, superstructural things of training in script writing in relation to gender, sexuality and race, and that's not really done to any significant level. And that's where I think, again, states need to step in with their funding to make sure that that's much more effectively done. So, for example, even like the use of sign language, like you talking in subtitles, actually, it's exceptionally rare that you'll ever see that as kind of incorporated into the creative element of the film. Sign language or subtitling, any of those kind of things, or even more importantly, audio description. I think audio description could be a truly great element of the creative process of creating a film, but it isn't. It's just someone on a voiceover going, and he picks up a gun. Dreadful stuff. And actually, you need to get filmmakers to engage in all of those things to boost the creativity of the film. And again, that's why you need disabled people so that they can think. A good example, a friend of mine is an actress, is in a big drama in Britain. She had a director, and because she was in a wheelchair with people who stand up, he had no idea what to do with her. So they had to build a box to raise the wheelchair to her level so that he could deal with shooting it, actually the mise-en-scene of the shot. And it's kind of like, this guy's gone on to be a big director. It's kind of like, actually, I wouldn't let him near a camera, let alone anything else. If you're resorting to having to build boxes to put a disabled person on in a wheelchair to make them all level, because you cannot creatively deal with that, is just dreadful. So, absolutely.
All right then. So, a rating for this modern day reworking of Beauty and the Beast. Francine, 1 is terrible, 10 is fantastic. What do you make?
I give it 9. I really enjoyed the experience of watching it.
Hero?
I give it a 4.
Paul?
I'll give it a 6 because I saw it completely differently to everybody else.
I'll give it a 4.